This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. We begin with KSRE agent for Douglas County, Margit Kaltenekker, and Upper Wakarusa WRAPS coordinator with the Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams, Andrew Rutter. They join us to share information on the upcoming whole farm health workshops that they've helped put together. These workshops will be taking place on February 23rd, March 2nd, and March 9th in Overbrook, Kansas. Also ahead, advocacy for agriculture through social media is seemingly becoming more popular. Joining us to share tips on entering into the digital space as a producer is K-State Assistant Professor in Agricultural Communications, Jacqueline Aenlle. We end with this week's wildlife segment where K-State aquatics and fisheries specialist Joe Gerken highlights how connected our water resources really are and some great tools to learn more about watersheds. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. I'm joined now by two special guests. We have with us Margit Kaltenekker. She is the agricultural agent for Douglas County, as well as Andrew Rutter. He serves as the Upper Wakarusa WRAPS coordinator with the Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams. And they're joining us today to talk about an upcoming program that they've put together. It's the Whole Farm Health Workshops program. So first and foremost, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you, Samantha.
I'm excited to be talking about this program. Whole Farm Health is what you're calling it, and I think that name suits the programming. So how did it really get started?
Yeah, the subtitle is Building Resiliency from the Field to the Farmer. And this came about as I was approached by Cheryl Hunsinger. She is the women's chair for the Farm Bureau District Number 2 of Eastern Kansas. And she approached me sometime last fall saying, we really need to put on something with addressing the mental health crises that's kind of happening throughout our agricultural communities. And as we started discussing it, it became evident, well, what's at the root of that mental health and stress? And a lot of it's given these financial times, this increasing inflation and other pressures that are happening throughout the farm economy that are also affecting our farmers. And then at the root of that, some of it we recognize, might be related to the soil health quality questions, productivity of their soils, the resilience of their soils themselves. And so that's how we then ended up seeing that really it's a bigger picture than just the individual mental health, though that's such an important part of it. You can't have one without the other. And our other partners include Douglas County Conservation District as well as Frontier Farm Credit.
And you just highlighted the 3 days of workshops that you're going to be holding for this program. It's going to be highlighting regenerative soil health, increasing farm financial resiliency, and then care for mental health and wellness within our production communities. So those 3 events specifically, I guess, who all is going to be a part of, your target audience for those? Is it everyone should attend each of these, or is there like a specified day that you think would be perfect for individuals specifically?
It's directed toward the agricultural community in general, but really you can kind of pick and choose what you think you'll be able to get out of those days. And I think Margit really hit the nail on the head there, tying all of these facets together. Our interest in this is really thinking about getting the agricultural community to think about their position in the watershed and how their soil health can impact what runs off of their property, because that's really directly tied to the health of their soil and their land as well as their profits, right? And so what we really want are cropland and livestock operators that think they might be able to get something out of the soil health regenerative facet of the first day, as well as anybody in the agricultural community who wants to really think about maximizing profits versus putting all of their efforts toward inputs and yields on the financial health side of things on the second day. And then the mental health of the farming community really ties this all together, right? You can't run a business like a farm without being in the right headspace with your family and your operation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an all-encompassing job. I think that's often forgotten in a lot of ways across the country, but these jobs are challenging. And because of that, this program is going to be so impactful for those that get to attend. And you really talked through each of the 3 days just then, but they're going to be taking place February the 23rd, March 2nd, and March 9th in Overbrook, Kansas. And I I know that there's going to be speakers at each of these that listeners can really look forward to hearing from, right?
Of course, yeah. So we've also tried to time these events to kind of work with people's schedules. We know that a lot of the farming community is working during the daylight hours. And so these are going to be evening events at Grace Community Church in Overbrook. So a really centralized location there. But we're targeting 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. The first day on February 23rd, we're going to have Keith Burns from Green Cover Seed up, and he's got a presentation talking about the microbial community and how that influences the productivity of your soils. It's called the 6 Keys to Biological Grace. The second presenter is Lucinda Stunkel, and she's got a farming operation in north central Kansas where she talks about incorporating cover crops into your normal cash crop rotation and then really utilizing grazing to maximize the benefits of using those cover crops and building up your soil organic matter.
And we're also going to have Deanne Pretzley and Peter Tomlinson from K-State just briefly sharing in about interpreting soil tests as, kind of that tool that everyone does and knows about, but then they're going to bring in a little bit more of their research as well on how the cover crops can affect our soil tests. So that'll be neat, bringing in some of the K-State research as they explore that.
Some familiar voices there from that team here at K-State. And then on day 2, when it comes to farm financial resiliency, what can listeners expect to hear from them?
Yeah, so we're going to be having Dr. John Eichert, Professor Emeritus from University of Missouri as an agricultural economist that has written extensively about managing risk within a farm system. So his talk is going to be addressing all of these impacts that farmers are facing and then maybe how to grab a hold of those impacts so that they're not necessarily running you over, but able to manage them in a way that you have greater resiliency. And then that'll be followed by Bryce Custer, who's a farmer from out west. He's going to be sharing more of a personal experience in transitioning his farm from, high input, high debt, managed to pull his farm out from almost near loss of financial straits that he's going to be sharing as well with looking at the finances and looking at the risk management tools that he was able to kind of use to his advantage and help farmers go through some exercises actually to digest those numbers and practice sort of, well, what are you going to do in this scenario? Some scenario planning type thing. And we're really hoping that any farmers that are currently using cover crops and no-till would also join us, especially that night, to be able to be part of the conversation around the table with those farmers that are maybe exploring making transitions and figuring out, how do I do this? How can I really make this work for me, one step at a time?
Absolutely. Providing their own testimony of sorts so that others can benefit. I feel like there's a lot of group learning that always takes place at events like this. So that's exciting to look forward to. And then night 3, really the capstone to all of this. Like you mentioned before, this was the end goal in mind that each of you had, and it was care for mental health and wellness. So people that attend, what can they expect to hear that night?
We're going to have a couple of speakers. I'll talk about the first couple and then Andrew can finish the other part. But the first one's going to be Rebecca McFarland. She's the director of Frontier District as well as the Family Consumer Science Agent. So she'll be sharing Weathering the Storm in Agriculture, Cultivating a Productive Mindset. And she's got this as sort of like a group activity as well, and helping people identify the stressors that are affecting them. We all have our own kind of constellation of stressors. So then by identifying those, then the second presentation, Mindfully Managing Stress and Supporting Others, is going to be given by Julia Gaughan, who's with Bert Nash in Lawrence, Kansas. And so she'll be actually helping kind of identify, okay, these are the signs, and now here are some strategies to help you manage that.
Joel Neitzel is going to be there to kind of facilitate after the presentations an open discussion about the mental health of farmers in the area. He's with Kansas Corn, and he's done similar kind of open forums with this in the past. And we think it's really important to have farmers there to keep the dialogue going and keep it farmer-centric. This is a community that's historically been kind of closed off when it comes to the mental health of everyone. And that's kind of at the core of the problem, right? We really need to get people there to talk about things in the open and what they're struggling with, whether it's their family struggles, their financial struggles, or their cropland struggles. They're all tied together. And having someone with a background like Lowell's is really important for that.
facilitating important conversations at this event for sure. A key area of this event, I would say one of the major highlights of it is you're not only hearing from some amazing experts, but you're also going to be fostering conversations in a community here in Kansas.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. And that's part of the reason why we're wanting the evening meetings so we can get more people out and have a dinner. The meals will be free. And we want people to come and, the community has been so isolated as a whole through COVID and the, pandemic stuff. And now I think just the overall economic stressors is sort of like everyone's just scrambling. It seems like, but take a break and come and sit around the table and, come together as a community so that we recognize, we're not alone, that we're all in this together. We have to function as a healthy community as well as healthy individuals within our communities. And this gives us that opportunity.
Absolutely. And if listeners are tuning in and they're, local to this area or maybe even willing to make the drive out to come and attend these events, where might they be able to register for it at?
So the registration page is at Douglas County's extension website, which is douglas.k-state.edu. And there'll be the flyer and all the links that then lead to the registration are there at douglas.kstate.edu.
Wonderful. Well, I'll be sure to link to that portion of the page as well, where you can register and learn more about this event if you are interested. In the show notes of today's show, which can be found on agtoday.net, as always, we'll have easy clickable links there if you are interested. But thank you both so much for joining me today, for talking about this event, and looking forward to seeing all of the good conversations that take place.
Yes, we are too.
Absolutely. Once again, everyone, that was Margit Kaltenekker. She is the agricultural agent in Douglas County, as well as Andrew Rutter. He serves as the Upper Wakarusa WRAPS coordinator with the Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams. Also ahead, advocacy for agriculture through social media is seemingly becoming more popular. Joining us to share tips on entering into the digital space as a producer is K-State Assistant Professor in Agricultural Communications, Jacqueline Aenlle. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by Jacqueline Aenlle. She's an assistant professor of ag communications here at K-State. And she's joining us today for a conversation on social media use in agriculture. So Jacqueline, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Happy to be here and excited to talk about this topic.
Absolutely. And Jacqueline, I didn't even tell listeners, but you also have a podcast of your own or some experience in it. And now you teach those sort of skills here at K-State. So a full circle moment for you.
Absolutely. Yes. I started my podcast when I was a student of agricultural education communication in my master's. And so, here we are years later to come back around and talk about using my own experiences as a podcaster and working on social media and in agriculture advocacy. It's definitely surreal. Glad I can keep contributing to the next wave of people who will be joining the advocacy scene online.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the entryway to our topic today. Like I said, social media use in ag, it's becoming more and more prevalent, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So recent 2022 data tells us that 63% of people globally use the internet. Of those people, 93% use social media. So you're reaching a broad audience. Of course, there's that younger demographic of, 18 to 50 that use it more, but there's a lot of people online at all times. So it's hugely prevalent. It's increasing across all social media platforms and new media platforms. So podcasting, videos, mostly videos. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, a little bit later. But that is what people are wanting to see. And that's how people are getting their information, whether it's about ag or any other topic.
I think with ag on social media, what comes to my mind sometimes is the misinformation out there. Mm-hmm. And that's why we'll get into it. That's why it's so important for people in agriculture to be active on social media, right?
That's the main reason why there's been studies on this too. That's one of the main reasons if you ask advocates online, why are you talking about ag? Why are you sharing your story? It's exactly that, to combat the misinformation and disinformation that we've unfortunately only see increasing as well as people keep using social media, as people have a voice, as people build these huge networks of followers, they're not always sharing the same information that we have as agriculturalists. And that's a huge problem that we need more and more people to help combat.
You mentioned that, in the past several years, this has really started to pick up in the ag sphere. And it's been changing, especially since the pandemic. There's been some trends that have changed.
Yeah. During COVID, a lot of things changed. So, how people looked at science changed, so including agricultural science. But we also saw this really cool change in people were asking more questions about where their food came from, right? As we saw shelves being empty and people worrying about the supply chain. I think we remember milk dumping. That was a huge story. I'm from California originally, and that was a big thing. So people started paying a lot more attention. We saw more people being online, trying to connect with people, and that's the only way you could do it. We saw more and more consumers purchasing online. So now 91% of social media consumers are buying through online stores. With that, also an increase in local food accounts. So like I said, we're looking and worried about where our food comes from. We start turning to local sources. We can't rely on transportation. And then we're developing these relationships with our farmers and ranchers. So COVID-19 obviously had its downsides and challenges, but it might have just been a great thing for ag.
So the opportunity is there for those that are willing to take it, right? So if producers tuning in are listening and they've had interest maybe in growing their own little ag online community, this is encouragement to do that, right?
Oh, 100%. Sometimes I'll talk with people that maybe don't currently have a platform, but they're trying to, like we said, make an audience, let their opinions be heard and shared, and they don't feel or don't understand how they can use these platforms to do that. And I just want to invite you to try, because I guarantee that this is a great opportunity and a great time to get started.
Kind of advice on what to share. I think that's the first thing producers nobody's interested in what I do day to day, but there are people out there that are.
And especially in ag, you will find, I promise, the second you start putting agriculturally focused content on social media, you will have waves of people coming out to support you. There is no community that I know that's more supportive than other agriculturalists, farmers, and producers. But you'll see a lot of content focused on education. The two main reasons people produce ag content on social media is for agri-marketing. You have a product, you're doing direct to consumers, or to combat false information. So you're focusing on educational things like courses or websites or podcasts you're sharing. You're doing infographics, others small form presentations, maybe on reels or things of that nature. But the most important piece of sharing information on social media is to make it consistent, reliable, and accurate, which hopefully sounds very achievable. You have a lot of great resources and yourself, a lot of anecdotal information as the producer, the farmer, the expert at your operation. And then you have great people at local co-ops or companies or K-State who can help boost the information you're sharing or provide you with that reliable, factual information to share. So that's more of the technical, what categories of information are we sharing and how do we make it most effective? Consistent, reliable, accurate. But on top of that, people should be sharing personal opinions on hot topics in agriculture, or show us your everyday life. What do you do? What does that look like? And open it up so people can connect with you as a person. And then that second layer of that relationship is learning about the factual information about how you do what it is you do.
Yeah, making ag something that's more personal to, an outside audience that maybe has no idea what agriculture looks like in Kansas. Putting a face to that industry and making it more approachable.
Yes, and that can be, I feel like when I talk to people about social media, that sometimes is the most scary part. Putting you, your family, your face on the social platform and talking into the void, right? Kind of like what we're doing right now, a podcast, talking into the void. But that's how you, like you said, that's how you form that connection. You personalize it. When we talk about, mention misinformation a lot here, and we're combating false information. To do that, we are asking people that watch our content to trust us over other accounts or information they're seeing. And the way we do that is by building a trusting relationship. And the first way to do that is to let them get to know you.
And I know that you had some tips on different social media formats. So whether that's Instagram or Facebook. So just some advice for those pursuing different content formats.
Yes. This could be a full hour-long lecture or conversation. So we're going to just put it into bite-sized chunks here. And this is not to overwhelm anyone listening. If you haven't started a social media platform, I am not about to tell you to start on all these different platforms. Pick one that you're most comfortable with. But some general tips and rules from some of the most common or popular social media platforms right now is you've probably heard of Facebook. Facebook is a great way to have communities. You can build groups, have a business page. But what we know about the algorithm for Facebook as of the 2021 and 2022 updates is that they prioritize family and friend connections to your business. So If you have a large personal account with a lot of followers, they will more easily and readily see your information than if you have a business page. Also, your personal account will probably have more followers in the beginning. So leveraging your personal network would be a good move for Facebook. For Instagram, avoid clickbait. Instagram likes to, and I honestly personally don't mind it, they will do the opposite of, we want our content to go up in the algorithm, right, to be seen first. The exact opposite will happen if you start posting those giveaways or anything that's trying to like trick you into clicking off into a different site. So avoid those and just prioritize making relationships. That will come back later. And then if you decide Twitter is your platform, especially this might be more for if you're trying to reach like an academic audience. If we have people here that are affiliated with the university or other universities in Kansas, Twitter is great because you can post like 2 to 8 times a day is like the sweet spot for Twitter. Short content, right? But they definitely prioritize things in the last 24 hours. So you need a little bit more of a consistent posting schedule to stay like higher up in the algorithm. But overall, across all platforms, no matter what you choose, we talk about something called SEO, so search engine optimization. And that just basically means if you have content, like associate it with as many other outside sources as you can. And what I mean by that is if I am interviewing Sam Bennett on my podcast and I'm posting on Instagram about it, I'm going to tag Sam. I'm going to hashtag Sam and her podcast. I'm going to tag K-State or Ag Today or whatnot. So having all these external connections brings people from other, for this example, from Sam's network will then see my content. From people that like Agriculture Today will now see my content. So we're trying to increase the reach of the things we post on social media. So those are some quick tips.
And as we're wrapping up here, just some major takeaways from those that are listening today. You wanted to hit on 3 things at the very end here.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to do so. So the first final piece of advice of why social media advocacy for agriculture is so important is that if you are not telling your story, someone else will. We can't always control the rhetoric or the conversations around issues that happen in ag or our specific discipline, but you can try to contribute your voice to some of these hot topic issues. And this is one way to do it is social media. There's many other ways to advocate or lobby or things like that, but this is the first way to share your firsthand account as an expert in these fields. A second takeaway is especially if you're trying to engage with a younger demographic, and once again, by younger, I'm meaning like 20 to 45. We have these generations of like millennials that we know they're very interested in having a relationship with the people they buy products from. They're very conscious consumers. So this is a great way to connect with them. We know they are on these social platforms, especially that demographic. And so they can form, once again, coming back to that trusting relationship and feel comfortable buying from you. Last but not least, social media, I think, gets this bad reputation. You'll have those kind of like schemy, facetious reach outs that like pop up in your like message box of them trying to make you buy something or whatnot. And that shouldn't be what this is. The point of using social media is to develop genuine relationships with people that are either interested in your lifestyle, your product, or your opinions. So this is to grow your network and then get engaged in conversations and topics that we can help to diffuse instead of infuse with more tension. I feel like that's a really important thing to mention when we're talking about people getting involved in social media is just to be aware that it can definitely be a controversial platform or controversial conversations can happen on this platform, but we're there to be a voice of knowledge, reason, empathy, and just share what we know from what we do and what we experience.
Jacqueline, this conversation has been wonderful. Hopefully this has inspired somebody out there to maybe, dive into it a little bit.
I hope so.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Jacqueline Aenlle. She's an assistant professor of ag communications here at K-State. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are ending this Monday's show as we always do with our wildlife segment for the week. And joining us for that this week is Joe Gerken. He is our K-State aquatics and fisheries specialist. So, Joe, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. So, water's been a heavy topic we've been talking about here on Ag Today. So it seems fitting that you came in and said, let's talk about watersheds.
Yeah, water's really important, and we tend to think about where our water is, like where it ends up. So it ends up in our pond. we don't always think about, where it's coming from and why that matters. So I thought we could chat about that for a few minutes today.
Yeah, absolutely. Our water often travels, and that's a forgotten area, I guess. So I guess the beginning of our conversation, we should start with defining what exactly is a watershed.
Sure. So if you think about a raindrop falling somewhere, a watershed is basically just where is that raindrop going to go? And the watershed is going to vary in its size depending on what we're talking about. So your little pond at your house is going to have a much smaller watershed than if we're talking about the Mississippi River, which covers 3/4 of the United States, so a really big watershed.
So various sizes, but when we think about Kansas specifically, what are some of the big watersheds that might come to mind?
Yeah, so the Kansas River watershed would be the biggest one that encompasses, probably about 3/4 or maybe even more than that of Kansas itself. The water is going to flow into the Kansas River. The Arkansas River is another one. Cimarron River, when you get really southwest, especially Kansas. So those are some of the bigger ones. We're talking about watersheds in Kansas. It also depends on where you're at in the state. So a 1-acre pond might need, 1,000 acres in western Kansas where they're not getting a lot of water. And that same pond in eastern Kansas might only need 10 or 20 acres. So the size is really important based on where you're at in the state.
You just mentioned why they're important for ponds is kind of the size of the surrounding area, right? But when homeowners or landowners are thinking about ponds and maintenance and watersheds, how does that connect for them?
Sure. So when you're first starting to construct a pond, it's really important. So if your watershed's too big, you're going to get a lot of sediment and erosion coming in. There's just going to be too much water. It's going to cause a lot of problems. The flip side of that is if your watershed's too small, you're not going to have enough water coming in. And so your pond's going to be dry all the time. It's going to be hard to enjoy it if there's no water in it. So getting the right size watershed, looking at that before you construct your pond would be really important. And then there's also a lot of management aspects with it as well. So, making sure that we understand, is there a lot of agricultural fields that are fertilized coming into our pond? That's going to be a different management than if we have livestock or CRP or something like that.
With that consideration in mind, fertilizer, erosion, things like that, our ponds, we need to be addressing those concerns, right? In terms of plants that are maybe planted as well?
Yeah, so we're starting to come up, in the colder months, plants aren't that active. But once we start to get to the warmer months, and we're coming up on that pretty quickly, it's going to be March or April, it's going to be growing season pretty soon. And when we get to that stage, we start to see lots of plant growth. I start to get a lot of calls about filamentous algae, people call it pond moss, that starts to show up. Other aquatic vegetation starts to show up, and we want to make sure we have a management plan in effect early spring. That's the easiest time to get some of those things under control. So we'll talk about those later, but it's important to remember that what we're doing in our watershed can then feed into the water, and that can relate back to some of those pond management goals that we have for the system.
Absolutely. Probably a conversation we'll have here in the future, a bit more about plant management in our ponds. But if producers are looking for a resource, a website potentially on understanding the watersheds in the U.S. even, or even just in their area here in Kansas, what might be a good resource for them to check out?
Sure. There's a couple that are really cool. There's one called River Runner from Sam Lerner. And River Runner, you can go in, you can enter your address or pick any place you want. You can do Bill Snyder Family Stadium if you want. So pick anywhere that you want, and it'll show you a raindrop falling and then where that raindrop travels. So if we dropped it right where we're sitting right now, it would flow to the Kansas River, across Missouri, down to Louisiana and the Gulf Coast. But you can follow that raindrop, and it's kind of a fun activity. There's also an EPA website that is called How's My Watershed, and that'll give you a lot of information about just water quality in general that you can look at for your specific watershed.
Wonderful. Well, great resources. I'll be sure to link to those in the show notes of today's show, which, as always, can be found on agtoday.net. But, Joe, like we said, conversation still to continue in our next segment with you. But thanks so much for everything you've shared today.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Once again, everyone, that was K-State Aquatics and Fisheries Specialist Joe Gerken joining us for a conversation on watersheds. That concludes today's programming. We'll be back with more tomorrow on Agriculture Today.